You're listening to the Connection Care Community Podcast, a podcast designed to help you understand your body more deeply and feel more confident navigating your hormones, cycle, and fertility. Each episode offers grounded, research-informed guidance and integrative tools to support hormone health, embodied awareness, and informed choice. If you're seeking clarity, connection, and a more trusting relationship with your body, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Here's your host, the founder of Connection Care Therapy, Majida.
Hello and welcome to the Connection Care Community Podcast. My name is Majida, and today we'll be talking about endometriosis. More specifically, we'll be talking about endometriosis not just as a gynecological condition, but as an immune system story. Because there's oftentimes a moment that people who are navigating endometriosis reach where the explanations that they've been given start to kind of fall apart. And this has to do with endometriosis not being about only where tissue is growing, where it doesn't belong, and then removing that tissue. Because if that was the case, then for those out there who are navigating endometriosis and have had some kind of surgical procedure done, and then the endometriosis returns, you realize that may not have been the fix. Or you're doing something in regards to hormone and hormonal suppression, but that also isn't quieting the endometriosis. And so for many, these symptoms, despite the interventions that they're doing, persist. The pain will flare up unexpectedly, fatigue that doesn't seem to line up with lab work. You might have digestive issues that never seem to fully resolve, inflammation that feels systemic rather than just localized. So this is what this podcast is about. This point that those of you who may be out there navigating endometriosis or know someone who's navigating this condition is the point where the research starts to invite us to widen our lens, not away from gynecology, but into a deeper immune system conversation. So one of the most interesting questions in endometriosis research isn't how endometrial-like tissue ends up outside of the uterus, but it's a question of why isn't the body removing it? So there's this thing called retrograde menstruation, and it happens, actually, it's not an uncommon thing for the vast majority of menstruating bodies. And yet there's only a small percentage who develop this condition known as endometriosis. What researchers are increasingly exploring is what's called immune surveillance, the system that is responsible for recognizing what belongs in the body and what doesn't belong in the body. That's what our immune system does. It's then responsible also for clearing what's not supposed to be there, what's out of place. However, what the research is showing is that in people with endometriosis, these immune cells oftentimes recognize lesions but don't respond in the way that they're expected to respond. Instead of clearing them away, the immune system may actually begin to tolerate them, inflame around them, and even in certain situations support their survival. So we don't want to frame this as a failure of the body. For those of you who have been listening to me for some time, you know that that's just not how I frame conversations. It's just not my vibe, right? But what we are seeing is a pattern, and one that is shaped by our immune system signaling, our hormones, genetics, environmental exposures, and even lived experience. So starting with just a little bit of a deeper dive into the immune system. There are two immune cells that show up again and again in endometriosis research. You have one that's called macrophages, and then the other are called mast cells. So you can think of macrophages, and I'm oftentimes so tempted to say macrophages, so you might hear people call them that as well. But macrophage, right? Macrophages is what we can kind of give an analogy of. It's like the body's maintenance crew. Okay, it's their job is that they work to clean up debris, dead cells, bacteria, tissue that's out of place. In short, they're doing their thing and quietly restoring order. However, in endometriosis, that maintenance crew is not just cleaning up and leaving. they're gathering around lesions, they start sending out signals that unintentionally support the very tissue that they're supposed to be clearing out. So instead of resolving the issue, they may call for more blood supply or more nerve growth or more structural reinforcement. It becomes less of a cleanup job and more of, we could say like a renovation project that allows these lesions to stick around. And for those who are navigating endometriosis, it oftentimes can lead to pain actually increasing and deepening. So then you have the mast cells, right? We just talked about macrophages, and now we have mast cells. It's this second type of immune cell that we're just going to do a little bit of a deep dive into. These are immune cells that are oftentimes best known for their role in allergies. When they're activated, they release what's called histamine. Many of us are familiar with the histamine response, like if you have allergies, right, the histamine response. And they're also responsible for other different types of inflammatory chemicals that can do things like increase swelling, making the nearby nerve cells and what have you more sensitive. So in endometriosis, mast cells are oftentimes elevated and also easily triggered. It helps to kind of explain why endometriosis pain can, for many, feel like kind of hot, right? Reactive, even inflammatory. Why these flares sometimes even come around times of stress or illness, environmental exposures, or time in our cycles when we're more vulnerable to inflammation. And it's also why antihistamines or mast cell support strategies may sometimes provide relief in a way that surprises people who are navigating endometriosis. So viewed in this way and through this lens, through the lens of the immune system and the immune system response, it starts to become kind of clear that endometriosis isn't always just like a fixed condition. It can start to look more like an ongoing immune system conversation where you have certain players that are amplifying certain signals instead of resolving those signals. So it's important to note, right, for those who are out there trying to figure out answers, and perhaps something like this podcast might start to point you in a bit of a direction to look into. This conversation around inflammation is a big piece of the puzzle. And it's important to note that inflammation doesn't exist in isolation. It's shaped by hormones. Remember earlier I said that there's certain times in our cycle where we're more vulnerable to things like inflammation. We're more vulnerable to the exposure around like histamines and things like that. It's because that our body in all of its complexity and nuance is always interacting with other parts of our bodies, right? It seems super obvious, but it may be surprising that things like inflammation is actually very, very much linked to our hormones, and specifically estrogen. So let's get into estrogen a little bit and unpack this a bit more. Estrogen, right, influences immune system signaling in really powerful ways that you might not be familiar with. Estrogen can amplify inflammatory pathways. It can affect how our immune system tolerates certain types of tissue. What complicates things a little bit further is when those endometriosis lesions, well, those lesions can actually produce their own estrogen. I remember when I was first learning about this, I was like, wow, this is really, the body is really, really powerful and just very, very complicated, right? It's like you have these lesions that are producing their own localized feedback loop where inflammation and estrogen start to reinforce each other independent of what's going on with the ovaries and their hormone production. So this may be one of the explanations for why hormonal suppression doesn't always resolve symptoms, why things like fatigue, brain fog, joint pain, whole body flare-ups oftentimes can accompany what is labeled a quote-unquote pelvic condition. Some researchers are beginning to explore overlaps between endometriosis and immune-mediated conditions, not because endometriosis is necessarily being framed as being an autoimmune disease in the classical sense, but because they're seeing similar patterns around immune tolerance and chronic inflammation that keep showing up, that keep appearing. So, per usual, can't really do a Connection Care Community podcast and not talk about the gut, because gut health is one of the most overlooked pieces in endometriosis care. Certainly me as a hormone health practitioner who has seen quite a few people who are navigating this experience, always start with the gut, right? Because one of the big things in this gut immune system pelvic connection, the gut houses the pretty significant, if not majority, portion of our immune system, which means that when the gut is compromised, you're going to have things like immune regulation suffer. Inflammation can then become systemic. Things like estrogen metabolism can become less efficient. All of that can then exacerbate a condition like endometriosis. What the research is pretty consistently showing is that there are differences in the gut microbiomes of people with endometriosis, lower diversity of different gut excuse me, I'm sorry, it slipped up on my words, but like different bacterial ratios, right? Ultrabacterial ratios, inflammatory signaling stemming from the gut, lower diversity of a gut microbiome, right? I think if I'm remembering correctly, and don't fully quote me on this because I'm taking off the top of my head from one of a lecture that I teach on endometriosis, but I believe it was that research is showing approximately 80% of those with endometriosis also have symptoms of what would be labeled as IBS. Okay, so the gut-brain-pelvis axis is also something to consider in all of this. I really love to connect conversations around the nervous system and nervous system health, and the gut and the nervous system are deeply connected, and all of those two, right? Gut, nervous system. We also have the connection to the pelvis via the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve connects and is innervating between all three, right? The gut, the brain, the pelvis. So gut inflammation can really sensitize pelvic nerves. Chronic pelvic pain can disrupt digestion. These experiences are oftentimes not happening in isolation. So I've worked with clients whose endometriosis symptoms drastically, and I mean drastically, shifted once we started to address gut health concerns. And it's not me by any way, shape, or form saying that gut health issues cause endometriosis. That's a more nuanced and just a more nuanced discussion to have. But what I am offering is that because the immune system load is decreased when the gut is functioning healthily, that hormone signaling becomes clearer and better, that is a really fantastic root cause place to start when we're discussing endometriosis, its connection to the immune system, and supporting those of you who are out there who are navigating this condition. So if no one has supported you in looking at your gut health, I really do offer that is a really important place to start. So why does all of this conversation matter? I think for those who are out there who are maybe navigating this condition, it may hopefully provide a little bit of insight, because if endometriosis is understood as being more so immune system mediated, then care will probably change fundamentally. Pain isn't just being reduced to lesion size, or fatigue isn't just being dismissed as something that's in your head, or gut health and stress physiology and sleep quality and trauma history and environmental exposures. All of those things become really relevant, not just optional considerations. From an integrative lens, which is of course the lens that I'm coming from, the goal isn't going to be to quote unquote fix a broken body. It's going to be to support a system that has been adapting to this experience for a long time. And that support, the support of the system may look like supporting immune resilience, supporting in stabilizing and reducing inflammation, improving estrogen metabolism, calming mast cell activation, and definitely foundationally supporting the nervous system. So I go into a lot more practical details about these kinds of supports, nutrition and gut work and supplements and nervous system care, all of that more deeply in my Substack because this conversation deserves that level of nuance. So if you're wanting some more resources or to get into a little bit more of a deep dive into some of the things I'm saying here, please head on over there and grab those resources. I've seen clients who have been diagnosed with advanced endometriosis who are told that their only option is more surgery or even a hysterectomy. And I've worked with those clients in addressing things like the immune load, the gut health, estrogen metabolism, mast cell activity, the things that we're talking about here, nervous system regulation, and supporting all of that together, not perfectly, but being consistent and conscientious, and have seen symptoms shift. Pain becoming more manageable, energy returning, digestive system symptoms resolving, and some going on to conceive. Right? Others just simply getting their life back. Not because the things I do is some kind of a miracle, but because actually focusing on the individual, their body, and what their body needs as an individual, it becomes a space where care finally matches the complexity of the condition. So I want to be clear about something. Immune system involvement does not mean that something like stress causes endometriosis, as I said, or gut health causes endometriosis, or certain traumas create lesions. We're going to be doing more discussion about endometriosis in honor of Endometriosis Awareness Month. I have this is the first part of a series of this conversation. But what I am offering is that endometriosis lives at the intersection of systems, and that a person's lived experience matters. So understanding this can be really profoundly validating. It can support you in having a language for your symptoms that are not just pelvic. It also explains why one-size solutions and approaches in care can sometimes fall short. And it also opens the door for approaches that honor the whole body, that honor all of you, because endometriosis is oftentimes it's not going to be confined to one organ or one system or one explanation. And understanding this isn't just an academic exercise, it's really taking the first step towards feeling less alone in the body that you live in. So I want to close out there today. I hope that this conversation has been helpful to someone out there, perhaps providing a little bit of insight into your experience, or a potential lead into something that maybe hasn't been explored before. If you're someone is navigating endometriosis, please do give the rest of this series a listen. Pass it along to someone that you think it may help. And I just want to say thank you, as always, for being here. And just letting this work meet you exactly where you're at today. If this conversation resonated at all, as I mentioned before, have some additional resources and articles and support options on my Substack, as well as on my website, especially through this month of Endometriosis Awareness Month. So thank you again for being here. I look forward to chatting with you again soon. And as always, stay connected.
That does it for this episode of the Connection Care Community Podcast with Majida. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you're leaving with a fresh perspective on your body and overall well-being, along with practical tools you can integrate into daily life. The support doesn't stop here. Be sure to connect with us online at connectioncaretherapy.com for more resources to guide you on your journey. You can also find us on Substack and connect with Majida on Instagram at Majida Sai'da. Remember to rate, review, and share this podcast. And most importantly, stay connected.